Disclosure. So I was born in Los Angeles, California. Went to a Catholic high school and went to Yale. I majored in biochemistry, and I show these pictures because this is where I grew up. And now being able to stand in front of you to talk about a lifetime of experiencing cartilage was really quite humbling. And if you indulge me a few minutes here, I'll go over kind of where my head is at on everything. I thought the debate, as I was sitting in the audience, I was kind of chuckling to myself about all our follies about how we think we can get cartilage patients to do better. The main thing to remember when you're treating cartilage is that you are treating early arthritis. The fallacy of a traumatic cartilage shear injury is huge, and so you should always think in terms of the arthritic patient as opposed to a acute injury, shear lesion in a normal patient. So Lane Smith and David Sherman were kind enough to invite me into their lab, and I started working on articular cartilage. My first experiment required that I went down to the slaughterhouse in San Jose, California, where I was given a bag of 4 counties, which I took back to the lab. I'm going to show, you can see down there on the right, how to, with a scalpel and sterilely isolate articular chondrocytes. And at that point, I started doing metabolism and synthesis sort of projects, and it really started in my mind really leaning into the privileged type of tissue that articular cartilage is. One should always remember that the conditions in adulthood do not mimic those when you're in utero. So the vascularity of cartilage and the ability to deliver nutrients to the cartilage region just doesn't exist, and that is one of the reasons why cartilage has a poor capacity for repair. So this video demonstrates a articular cartilage injury that was associated with a patellar dislocation in one of my basketball players. This was the severity of the injury, and I remember distinctly the family and the GM asking me, well, when will the player get back? And what I was really thinking is, would the player get back? Because these are devastating. They're huge, they're functionally disabling, and we're now here in 2025 really finally at a point where we can start to talk about options to make these kinds of things better. But I started practice in 1997, and really the only options at that point were abrasion, arthroplasty, microfracture, and the beginnings of ACI. So in order to get cartilage patients better, there are requirements, and the requirements are restoration of functional anatomy, obviously getting something to grow in the area. There are no algorithms that will guide your treatment, and we're really there is no evidence that we can create functional articular cartilage in these lesions. Challenge 2 is the restoration of joint homeostasis. What do I mean? All of these joints are catabolic. They're full of proteases that break down cartilage, break down proteoglycan. This cascade starts once the lamina splendens of the cartilage is injured in these injuries. So by the time they get to your operating room, you have a bad environment for which it is very difficult to get anything to grow. And then the last one, much like in my ACL talk, there's a restoration of fitness. When you tear your ACL, you're fit. You have surgery within a few weeks. With these articular cartilage injuries, you may have symptoms for a year, 2 years, have 4 surgeries, 3 surgeries that have failed. These are debilitated, atrophic, unfit patients, and you have to consider all these factors when you're trying to get these people back to some sort of active lifestyle. The history of cartilage surgery is really quite sparse, quite frankly. In the 80s and 90s when arthroscopy started, they started using some of the tools which led to the abrasion arthroplasty. And when I was training in the 90s, it wasn't uncommon that a patient would be taken to the operating room for a meniscectomy. They would have a cartilage lesion which was not detectable because MRIs were not very specific back then. And instead of a quick recovery, the patient was told they needed to be on crutches for 6 to 8 weeks, CPM 8 hours a day, and a 6 to 12 month recovery. And this led to a lot of unhappiness and frustration for both the practitioner and the patient. So the early options, as I mentioned, were chondroplasty drilling and abrasion arthroplasty, which are all now in 2025 obviously in the dustbin of history. But really chondroplasty, abrasion, they really didn't address or attempt to reconstruct the area of damaged cartilage. And Johnson, in his article in 2001, described abrasion arthroplasty as a salvage procedure. 1994 came around. I was a senior resident at the time, and this article by Mats Brittberg and Lars Peterson came out in the New England Journal of Medicine, and all of a sudden it led to this renaissance and really was the genesis of our subspecialty of articular cartilage repair. It was the first FDA-approved cartilage repair mechanism in the United States, and your ability to do it designated you as an expert surgeon. So lots and lots of surgeons are trying to do this. Unfortunately, at least in the US, the results didn't translate clinically, and it was expensive with high reoperation rates. And in my opinion, this was one of the worst things that could have happened, because it really, vis-a-vis the FDA in the US, stopped innovation, because ACI was such a, it wasn't a failure, but it really was not as successful as the papers that led to its adoption would have suggested. My mentors, Dr. Warner and Wickowitz, were very interested in this area. By this time I was a fellow, and we started thinking about, well, how can we do better? How can we start to track these outcomes? Because in addition to ACI, microfracture was very popular. It was espoused by Dr. Dick Stebbin, who was at Vail at the time. And again, what we were seeing at HSS did not match all the wonderful stories that were being presented at our sports meetings. So we started an outcomes unit, which was then sort of focused on developing prospective tracking of outcomes, and our partners in radiology started to become a little bit more focused on helping us identify articular cartilage lesions before surgery to allow us to plan. So what does the evidence now in 2025 tell us about our options with regards to articular cartilage repair? Well, they fall into these categories. I won't rehash them all. We had a bit of a lively discussion before, but really quickly, palliative in my practice really is a bridging procedure, oftentimes just designed to allow an athlete to get back to sport within a season, and what you're really saying is that you're delaying the attempt at reconstruction. And the noted studies here basically show that over a short time interval, chondroplasty works, and if you happen to be feeling frisky, you can add adipose-based or bone marrow-based MSCs to get even a little bit more durability out of those procedures. And so what I would say to you is that for a temporizing procedure with an articular cartilage lesion, palliative as a strategy has good evidence. Bone marrow lesions, for those who treat high-demand athletes, are very common. They're often but not always associated with an articular cartilage injury, and they can cause severe functional deficits with no clear guidance as to how best to treat these. I've really leaned into the subchondroplasty procedure over the past 10 years. Cartilage procedure in my practice, I do it open. I never do it arthroscopically. I always do my recipient site first, because you never know what you're going to harvest, and I always over-drill by a millimeter. So lesional bone, you can backfill with demineralized bone matrix, take your pick, but just don't leave the hole, and typically you should be okay. And we've had several studies out of our registry which demonstrate excellent durability of the Oates procedure head-to-head with microfracture, as well as looking at them longitudinally. Other authors show as well really good results with the osteochondral autograft transfer, always superior to microfracture, 96% to 52% in study on the left, and then significant increases in PROMs noted with ALT compared to microfracture in the study on the right. Recently, Prem Ramkumar and Kelms Amu Champong did a more recent follow-up of our patients, and I was very happy to see you had a pretty reasonable reoperation rate, around 28%, the majority of which were for a bit of postoperative stiffness, but really good durable results out to 10 years, and I have another study coming out in another year or so which will demonstrate the same at about 15 years. So I am in love with the osteochondral autograft transfer and will always do it at every opportunity. I showed a couple of holes before. This is Graham Gano, who is a kicker for the Giants. I did an Oates procedure. I believe that's 2 8mm plugs, spaced a bit, and I did some fillage with micronized articular cartilage between them and some fibrin glue, and you can see excellent results at 3 years. He continues to play now 7 years after the procedure. Good evidence for the osteochondral autograft again. The only add-on comment I would say is if you're going to do it, I would recommend you do it open. I think it's much more exact. And the one criticism I would say of the arthroscopics I saw is that I think you're under-treating the lesion. I think the lesion's bigger than what you think, and it's hard to know that when you're doing it arthroscopically. You can only see part of it at a time. And again, I speak from experience. I did them all arthroscopic when I started, and my results are definitely better with the open. Osteochondral allografts. I've done about 3,000 osteochondral allografts. I'd say 10 years ago I was doing about 80 to 90 a year. In 2025, I'd maybe do 1 to 2. The problem with them is they allow you as a surgeon to feel really good about your procedure because you filled this hole with this beautiful piece of cartilage about which you know nothing. All you know is that you got it from some person and that it looks nice. No idea on biomechanical properties or cellular viability. I did my first case in 1998. It was a game changer because it really worked clinically. It was the most effective tool I had in a single stage to make these often multi-operated patients feel better. And you could use it anywhere. It's a utilitarian graft. The patella, the femoral condyles, the tibia, trochlea, it worked pretty much anywhere. And then we started to look at in the lab, like, what were we putting into these patients? What was the minimum amount of viability that you needed to have? And we got everything from this beautiful, all green, totally viable specimen on the left to these osteochondral allograft specimens on the right. And these were all clinically used cartilage specimens that were shipped to us to implant into patients early. This study by Jamie Dries basically shows that you're able to maintain a high degree of cellular viability in storage over about 60 days. And in these studies, which the surgeries were done by Anil RANAWAT back when he was a resident, basically, don't get caught up in the graph. It basically is a graph that demonstrates that if you kill the cartilage before implantation, the proteoglycan leaks out. But if you transplant live cartilage into a knee, whether that's a high degree of viability or low, you preserve the biomechanical properties and you preserve the proteoglycan. So all that means is that live cells in an allograft specimen will maintain the matrix and you can expect good results. We've demonstrated good results with osteochondral allografts at short and intermediate time periods. We've also demonstrated good results in high demand athletes at about 88% with a 79% full return to sport with prospective imaging, prospective outcomes. Bill Bugbee, my colleague out in San Diego, California, also does a lot of these. And again, in high demand recreational athletes shows similar rates at about 75%. So if you have access to the osteochondral allografts, they are what I would say a good option. But I will say, when I was doing them in 2005, I thought that I had come up with a 20-year solution, and we were all about, at that time, publishing papers to show people how good they were. It didn't matter if you went right to left, male to female, rotated, not rotated, they all seemed to do pretty good. But really, this was the paper that started to sour me on them a little bit, because these were the early arthritics I was seeing who needed the most, the 40-year-olds, the 50-year-olds getting up into the 60s. So this is actually, believe it or not, a 25-year-old. As an NBA player, and I got into surgery, I felt like I was a bit over my head, but somehow I managed to salvage it. I put 2 grafts into the trochlea, 2 graft into the patella, and then 10 months later, this former Rookie of the Year came into the nets and dropped 35 points on us. So really, I was very lucky with this one. He had good bony incorporation, and he was a pretty serious-minded guy with regards to rehab, but unfortunately, I think that was probably more the exception than the mean. So good evidence for osteochondral allograft transplantation, everyone. It's just not a permanent solution, and there is a high degree of failure in older patients. Briefly, juvenile articular cartilage. This is donor allograft cartilage from young patients. Again, part of my workhorse usage. Pretty good evidence in prospective studies, both in our lab as well as the Rush lab with Brian Cole. And this is what I used on the individual who I demonstrated earlier who had the patellar dislocation. He came back at 7 months. Interesting to know, he was not a particularly fit guy and was also a smoker. So a nice one-stage procedure for him. I won't really dig too much into ACI. It's not a big part of my practice, simply because ACI and MACI require really protracted amounts of protected weight bearing, which I don't think is compatible to a quick rehab, and the 12 to 18 months that are usually required for a rehab of a MACI don't fit the timeline for a college or pro athlete, at least in the United States. But I will say, if you look at the evidence, there is good evidence that the MACI procedure can be used in a high-demand athletes. Scaffolds, we do have CartiHeal, which is a acellular scaffold in the U.S. Really early, there's a paucity of evidence, so I would say proceed with caution. And then finally, just to leave you with some thoughts, just thinking about what I said about the osteochondral allografts. If you put an osteochondral allograft into a 17-year-old with a large OCD, it's going to fail. If you put an osteochondral allograft into a 48-year-old who's post-meniscectomy with articular cartilage lesion, it's going to fail. So I'm really starting to think like, well, who is the ideal patient for an osteochondral allograft, and what do I do with these patients that live somewhere between traditional arthroplasty and a biologic cartilage repair? Again, pooled failure rates with osteochondral allograft when you talk about bipolar disease and advancing disease is very high. And basically, if you go back in time, there was this implant, the Arthrosurface implant, which was designed as a meniscus-sparing uni, and I did quite a bit of these in the hemicap style where I would just resurface the femur and had good results. Over the COVID break, I helped to develop the Overture resurfacing system, which is designed as a uni. I've done about 120 of these, 90 of which have been femoral unipolar indications with good result. But again, something to think about in terms of how best to treat these early arthritics who have a catabolic joint without biologic tissue, which is subject to degeneration. So what are the best methods? The meta-analysis are very clear. Oates procedure always wins with a close second by osteochondral allograft. Again, if you have the time, doing an ACI or MACI is worth it. But again, microfracture, as I've always said, always loses. Keep in mind when you're treating this, what's the point about the early arthritic comment? You have to do something about the joint. You can't just resurface it and not think about, what's going in the effuse it. So rest, cryotherapy, you really need a dry knee before you can let an athlete go back and load. Emerging strategies such as the biologics, platelet-rich plasma, bone marrow aspirate, and adipose cells are all things I'm using judiciously in my practice. So key pearls as you move into this section: early weight bearing, restoration of gait, patellar mobility, really aggressive use of blood flow restriction, encourage physical activity, do some of the things I mentioned in the earlier lecture about longitudinal tracking, and just remind patients that rehabilitation is not fitness training and that the road to recovery after these procedures is oftentimes long. Understand lesion etiology, choose a method that makes sense for the type of repair, stay abreast of the evidence, it's always evolving. I would suggest you do PubMed searches very frequently after these types of procedures are indicated. Be aggressive. We didn't talk about addressing malalignment in this talk, but we'll talk about that later. Educate and address functional deficits. Use postoperative imaging to assess how you're doing as well. And always remember that although you're making your patients feel better, you're not curing their disease. And before I get down, I'd be remiss. In addition to Dr. RANAWAT, we also lost probably my most significant mentor, Dr. David Alchek. David was seminal in getting me hired at HSS. He started my career as a team surgeon, and I stand on the shoulders of giants and just wanted to acknowledge him in this lecture, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.